Hey, and welcome back to JVC English Learning Academy. My name is Laura, and I'm here to guide you on your journey to clear, confident, and natural English. If you truly love Jesus, like the video, subscribe to the channel, keep watching the video believing in Jesus, you will learn something good, and comment to let us know what you are watching. Your support truly helps this channel grow. Alright, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin today's session. It was early in the morning when the soft orange light of the sun slowly touched the small room where our story begins, and the moment the light passed through the curtains, a gentle feeling of change filled the air, because this was not a regular morning. And this was not a regular day, but the start of a journey that would take our listener, someone just like you far from home, into a world that speaks in different sounds, different rhythms, and different languages, and yet somehow the heart of communication remains the same, and that is why today is special, because today you are not only learning English, you are learning to travel with English, to use English as your companion, as your map, as your voice, and as your friend in places where nothing looks familiar. And this story begins with a traveler named Aaron, an ordinary person who always dreamed of seeing new places, but never felt brave enough to take the first step, because deep inside, he believed that travel was only for confident people, for people who spoke English fast and clearly, for people who walked into airports as if they owned them. But something changed inside him one evening when he watched a video from the JBC English Learning Academy. A video that spoke about confidence, about new experiences, and about how English is not something you need to be perfect at, but something you can grow into, one word at a time. And when the video ended, he felt something new inside. Something small but warm. Maybe hope, maybe courage, or maybe just the feeling that perhaps he could begin, even if he was not perfect yet. And so, the next morning, he opened his laptop, searched for flights, and with shaking hands he clicked book now, and suddenly, his life changed. Because the moment you book a ticket, you also book a new version of yourself, and that is exactly what Aaron was about to discover. In the days before his trip, Aaron walked around his apartment talking to himself in English, practicing small phrases like, "Excuse me," and "Can you help me?" and "Where is the station?" And even though his voice was shaky at first, every time he repeated the phrases, he felt a little stronger. Just a little more certain that maybe he could do this, and while he practiced, he imagined himself speaking to airport staff, to taxi drivers, to hotel receptionists, and to new friends he had not yet met. But every time he practiced, a small doubt whispered in his mind, "What if they don't understand me? What if I don't understand them? What if I freeze? What if I say something wrong?" And these thoughts made him afraid again, but then he remembered something important. Every traveler in the world feels nervous before the first trip, even the confident ones, even the ones who look calm and strong, because confidence is not something you are born with. It's something you create through your actions, and this simple idea helped him sleep a little easier. On the day of the trip, the sky was gray and the air felt heavy with the kind of silence that only exists at the beginning of a long journey. And as Aaron stepped out of his apartment, pulling his suitcase behind him, he felt both excited and afraid at the same time. But a quiet voice inside reminded him, "You are learning. You are growing. You are allowed to make mistakes." And with that thought, he walked toward the taxi that would take him to the airport. The driver smiled and asked, where to, and for the first time, Aaron heard his own English voice outside his apartment, speaking to a real person in a real situation, and he said, "To the airport, please," and the driver nodded, and Aaron felt something powerful. A small victory, a first success, proof that he could communicate. As the car moved through the familiar streets of his city, he looked out the window and realized that everything he knew was staying behind him for now, and ahead of him was a place where he didn't know anyone, where he didn't know the streets, where even the small signs would feel different, but instead of feeling lost, he felt curious, because maybe traveling is not about feeling comfortable, but about learning new ways to see the world. When he arrived at the airport, the big automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and the cool air inside touched his face, filled with the smell of coffee, perfume, and the excitement of hundreds of people moving in different directions, each with their own story, their own worries, their own hopes, and Aaron stood still for a moment, breathing in this feeling, because airports are special. They are places where everyone is going somewhere, where stories cross paths, where strangers share the same space even if they never speak to each other. He looked around and saw screens full of flight numbers, suitcases rolling across shiny floors, people hugging goodbye, people running to catch flights, and airport workers calling out instructions with calm voices. And though it all looked complicated, he reminded himself that he did not need to understand everything. He only needed to understand the next step. He walked toward the check-in counter, practicing quietly under his breath, "Hello, I have a ticket," and when he reached the counter, the airline employee smiled and said, "Good morning, can I see your passport?" And just like that, the first real exchange in English happened, and Aaron surprised himself by answering clearly. "You're all set. Gate 23. Boarding begins in 1 hour," and Aaron nodded, saying, "Thank you," and walked away feeling a warm spark inside his chest, because every word he said was a step forward. As he walked deeper into the airport, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before: the different accents, the families speaking different languages, the relaxed travelers laughing with friends, the nervous travelers checking their documents again and again, and he realized that travel is a mirror of life. Some parts are easy, some parts are confusing, but everything becomes manageable when you take it slowly. He found a place to sit near a large window where planes rested like giant birds, waiting to carry people to new worlds. He listened to airport announcements, trying to understand each word, and at first, the voices sounded too fast, like rain falling on a roof, but after he listened a few times, he started to catch small pieces: the flight numbers, the gate numbers, the words, boarding and final call, and each time he understood something, he felt more confident. While he waited, he took out a small notebook he carried with him, filled with English phrases he had written while preparing for the trip, and he read them slowly. "Excuse me, I'm looking for... Can you repeat that, please? I don't understand. Can you say it more slowly?" And as he whispered the words, he realized that English is not just a language, but a bridge between strangers, a tool that makes the world feel smaller, kinder, and more connected, and this idea made him feel less alone. Soon it was time to board the plane. People around him stood up, collected their bags, stretched, and moved toward the gate in a long line. He joined them, feeling his heartbeat rise, not because something was wrong, but because he was about to do something he had never done alone before. When he reached the gate agent, she scanned his boarding pass and said, "Have a nice flight," and he smiled and answered, "Thank you," and he felt proud that the words came out naturally. Inside the plane, the air was cool and smelled faintly of fabric and metal, and the seats looked small and close together, and people were putting their bags into the overhead bins while others settled quietly into their seats. Aaron found his seat near the window, placed his backpack under the seat in front of him, and looked outside, watching the bright wings of the plane shine under the sunlight. A flight attendant walked through the cabin with a smile, checking seatbelts and helping passengers who looked confused, and Aaron felt comforted by the warmth and calmness in her voice. When the plane began to move, Aaron felt a mix of fear and excitement, the kind of feeling you get when you stand at the edge of something new, and as the engines grew louder, he closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, reminding himself that every traveler in the world has felt this same mix at some point, and he whispered to himself, "It's okay. You're learning. You're growing. You're doing it." And when the plane lifted off the ground, rising gently into the sky, Aaron felt the weight of the world fall away, replaced by a soft, quiet freedom. During the flight, he watched the clouds move like soft mountains of white, and he thought about the journey ahead, wondering what kind of people he would meet, what kind of conversations he would have, what kind of mistakes he might make, and what kind of stories he would collect. He remembered all the times he avoided traveling because he was afraid of speaking English, afraid of sounding slow or unsure, afraid of misunderstanding or being misunderstood, and he realized that fear had kept him small. But now he was learning that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward even while feeling afraid. Hours passed, and the plane slowly descended into a new country, a place filled with new smells, new streets, new voices, and new possibilities. As the wheels touched the ground, Aaron felt a quiet joy inside him, like he had already grown a little taller, a little braver, a little more open to the world. When he left the plane and walked into the airport, he saw signs in English and the local language, heard announcements, saw new faces everywhere, and he felt a moment of overwhelm, but then he took a deep breath and reminded himself that he was ready, and that the only way to learn English for travel was to step into it, to experience it, to breathe it, to speak it, even if the words came slowly. At passport control, an officer looked at him and asked, "Purpose of visit," and Aaron froze for half a second. But then he remembered his notebook and said, "Travel." "Vacation," and the officer stamped his passport and waved him through, and suddenly Aaron felt a wave of happiness rush through him, because he had done it, he had communicated, he had understood, and he had been understood. And this small success made him feel strong enough for the next challenge. In the arrivals hall, people stood holding signs, families hugged each other, friends laughed loudly, taxi lights blinked, and the smell of coffee and fresh air mixed together, and Aaron stood in the middle of it all, feeling both tiny and powerful at the same time. He pulled out his phone and opened the map, but before he could search for directions, a taxi driver approached him and asked, "Taxi?" and Aaron nodded, walked toward the car, and practiced in his mind what he was going to say, "Please take me to this hotel." And when he said it, The driver smiled and said, "Of course," and as the car moved through the foreign streets filled with new colors and new buildings, Aaron looked out the window and smiled, because he knew that this was not just a trip, not just a vacation, but the beginning of a new version of himself. And so, as the city lights glowed softly outside the window and the taxi moved quietly through the unfamiliar streets, Aaron realized something beautiful. Travel is not only about places, it is about people, about language, about the courage to speak even when your voice is uncertain, about the curiosity to listen even when you only understand half, about the patience to try again when you don't get it right the first time, and about the joy of discovering that you are capable of more than you ever believed. And with this realization warming his heart, he leaned back in his seat, ready for whatever came next, ready to continue learning, growing, and speaking, one word at a time. When Aaron woke up the next morning in the small hotel room, the light coming through the window was soft and gentle, and for a moment he forgot where he was, because when you sleep in a new place for the first time, the world feels quiet and strange. And your body needs a moment to remember that everything has changed, and when he finally opened his eyes fully, he felt a warm excitement rise inside him, because today was his first full day in a foreign country, his first chance to explore, to speak, to listen, to experience the real world using English the way he had practiced for weeks. And as he sat up in bed, he smiled at the thought that every sound, every street, every conversation today would help him grow. He stood by the window, looking out at a street he did not recognize, where people walked quickly to work, where bicycles passed by, where small cafes opened their doors for the morning, where the air was filled with the smell of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and new possibilities, and he whispered to himself softly, "This is real. I am really here." And the idea made him feel both excited and nervous in a beautiful way. He took a shower, dressed simply, and grabbed his small notebook of English phrases before leaving his hotel room, because even though he felt more confident than yesterday, he still wanted something to hold in his hand, something that made him feel prepared. In the hallway, he greeted a housekeeper with a shy, "Good morning," and she smiled and repeated, "Good morning," and that simple exchange made him feel stronger. When he reached the lobby, the receptionist looked up and said, "Hello. Did you sleep well?" And for a moment Aaron felt his mind freeze, but then he answered, "Yes, thank you. I slept well." The room is comfortable, and when the receptionist nodded kindly, Aaron felt proud of himself, because small conversations like that are harder than people think, especially when every word feels like a puzzle piece you must place correctly. But he had done it. Slowly, calmly, and successfully. Outside, the morning air felt fresh and cool, and the city looked bright in the sunlight. People walked past him speaking different languages, but he noticed that many of them used English to help each other, and this made him feel less alone, because English was not only his second language, it was everyone's bridge, everyone's tool for connection. He decided to start his day at a nearby cafe he had seen from the taxi yesterday, a small place with wooden chairs, friendly lights, and a big sign that said "Fresh Breakfast." He walked in, feeling nervous again, because ordering food in another language always feels like a big step, but he took a breath and reminded himself that he did not need to be perfect, he just needed to try. The barista smiled warmly and said, "Hello, what can I get for you?" and for a tiny moment, the air felt heavy, like time slowed down, and then Aaron spoke calmly. "Can I have a coffee and a croissant, please?" And when the barista repeated, "A coffee and a croissant?" he nodded gratefully and said, "Yes, thank you." And when she handed him the receipt, he felt a soft burst of pride because the words came out naturally, like water flowing smoothly from a small stream. He sat down near the window, sipping his coffee slowly, watching the people outside start their day, and he listened to the small sounds of the cafe, the soft music, the hiss of the coffee machine, the quiet conversations around him. And suddenly he realized that he was no longer afraid of making mistakes, because everyone around him was focused on their own day, their own thoughts, their own challenges, and nobody was watching him closely. Nobody was judging him. And this realization made him relax deeply. He looked around and noticed a family struggling to understand the menu, pointing at pictures, laughing at their confusion, trying again and again, and this simple moment taught him something important. Even native speakers of other languages struggle when they travel. Everybody faces confusion. Everybody faces language barriers. So why should he be embarrassed? After breakfast, Aaron stepped outside with a fresh sense of energy, and he decided to explore the city without a specific plan, just walking, observing, listening, and letting English guide him when needed. He opened his phone to check the map, but instead of focusing on directions, he listened carefully to the English audio option of the map app, letting the robotic but clear voice help him practice listening skills. And as he walked, he repeated the street names quietly to himself, enjoying how they sounded, enjoying the way English blended into his journey without forcing itself. He passed small shops, busy intersections, children in school uniforms, and street musicians playing soft music, and he felt like he was inside a moving story, a story where he was both the main character and the narrator, discovering the world one simple word at a time. He walked for nearly an hour until he reached a beautiful park filled with tall trees, green grass, and a small lake where ducks floated peacefully. The park was full of tourists from different countries, and Aaron noticed something interesting. Many of them were using English even when English was not their first language. A group of tourists asked a man for directions using English. A couple talked in English even though they clearly spoke a different language at home. A tour guide explained the park's history in English for an international group. Aaron realized something powerful in that moment. English was a travel language, a language that helped the world communicate, a language that belonged to everyone. And this idea made him feel more confident because he understood that English did not need to be perfect, it just needed to communicate. He sat on a bench under a tall tree and took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the park settle inside him. He listened to different accents around him, some fast, some slow, some clear, some mixed with other languages, and he realized that all English accents are valid, all English voices are different, and yet all are understood. This made him think about his own voice, his own accent, his own rhythm, and he suddenly felt proud of the way he spoke, because it was his journey, his story, and his identity. He whispered to himself, "My English is good enough to travel. My English helps me connect," and these words felt like a quiet promise, a reminder to trust himself. After sitting for a while, he noticed a couple standing near a map, looking confused and turning the map in different directions. The man scratched his head and said in English, "I think the museum is that way," or maybe this way, and the woman laughed softly. Aaron hesitated, but then something inside him said, "You can help. You can speak. You can try," and before he could stop himself, he stood up, walked toward them, and said gently, "Excuse me, do you need help?" The couple looked at him with grateful faces and asked, "Do you know how to get to the art museum?" Aaron smiled and said slowly, "Yes. I think it's about 10 minutes from here. You go straight, then turn left at the big fountain," and when the couple thanked him, he felt a warm pride inside him because not only had he understood their question, but he had spoken clearly, naturally, and confidently. Helping someone in English felt like a small miracle, a sign that he was growing. After leaving the park, Aaron walked toward the old part of the city, where narrow streets curved between old buildings with beautiful windows and colorful flowers. He reached a small souvenir shop and decided to go inside to browse. The shop owner greeted him with a bright smile and said, "Hello. Where are you from?" And for a moment Aaron felt shy, but then he answered, "I'm from the Philippines," and the shop owner nodded kindly and said, "Welcome. Let me know if you need help," and Aaron felt relaxed. He looked around the shop, touching small wooden carvings, looking at postcards, magnets, and handmade bracelets, and after a few minutes, he found a small wooden keychain shaped like a tiny house, and he liked it. He took it to the counter, and when the shop owner asked, "Would you like a bag?" Aaron answered, "No, thank you. I can put it in my pocket," and the shop owner smiled warmly and said, "Your English is very good," and Aaron felt something inside him shine, because hearing those words from a stranger gave him confidence he did not know he needed. When he left the shop, he walked slowly through the old streets, feeling taller, lighter, and more open to the world. He realized that every conversation he had today, small or big, was building something inside him. A new voice. A travel voice. A confident voice that he had never heard before. A voice that was growing with every step he took. He smiled to himself and whispered, "I'm really doing it," and those words made him feel brave. Later that afternoon, Aaron decided to stop by a bookstore, not because he planned to buy anything, but because he loved the quiet feeling of bookstores and the soft sound of pages turning. Inside, he wandered through the aisles until he reached the travel section, and he saw a book titled "Speak English Anywhere," and he smiled at the coincidence. He opened the book and read a small paragraph that said, "When you travel, your English becomes alive. You learn not by studying, but by speaking, listening, asking, and trying." Aaron closed the book gently and smiled, because he felt like those words were speaking directly to him, describing exactly what he was experiencing. Feeling inspired, he approached the cashier and asked in English, "Can I buy a map of the city?" The cashier pointed toward the front counter and said, "Yes, we have several. Do you want a detailed one or a simple one?" Aaron thought for a moment and answered, "A simple one, please." Something easy to follow, and the cashier handed him a folded map. When Aaron paid, the cashier said, "Enjoy your trip," and Aaron felt grateful for the warmth in her voice. As he left the bookstore, he realized that every person he spoke to today had helped him in some small way, even if they didn't know it. As evening approached, the city lights slowly began to glow in warm colors, and the sky turned into soft shades of pink and purple. Aaron walked toward a river that ran through the center of the city, and when he reached the bridge, he stopped and leaned on the rail, watching the water reflect the lights of buildings and passing boats. He felt a calmness inside him, a quiet peace that comes only after a day full of learning and small victories. He thought about his conversations, the barista, the receptionist, the tourists, the shop owner, the cashier, and he realized that each conversation had been a step toward finding his travel voice, a voice that was clearer than he thought, stronger than he imagined, and braver than he expected. While standing on the bridge, he overheard two travelers nearby discussing directions in English, and even though he wasn't part of their conversation, he understood almost everything they said. This gave him a sudden feeling of joy, because listening is one of the hardest parts of learning English, and he was discovering that listening becomes easier not through studying, but through living. Through being part of a place where English is used naturally every moment. He smiled as he looked at the river, feeling connected to the world in a new way. As night arrived, he walked back to his hotel slowly, tired but happy. The streets were quieter now, the air cooler, and the city lights shone like stars along the sidewalks. When he stepped into his hotel room, he sat on the bed and took a deep breath. Today had been a long day, a full day, an emotional day, but most importantly, it had been a day of growth. He whispered to himself softly, "I can do this. I can speak. I can travel. I can learn," and these words felt like a gentle promise, a promise he was ready to keep. Before sleeping, he wrote in his notebook, "Today I found my travel voice." And as he closed the notebook and turned off the light, he felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had taken a bold step, someone who was becoming more confident, more open, more brave with every passing moment. And with that warm feeling in his heart, he drifted slowly into sleep, ready for the challenges and discoveries tomorrow would bring. The next morning arrived quietly, with a soft gray sky and a gentle chill in the air, and when Aaron opened his eyes, he felt that today would be different from yesterday, not easier or harder, but deeper. Like the kind of day that teaches you something about yourself, even if you don't notice it at first. He sat up slowly, rubbed his eyes, and listened to the silence of the room, a silence that felt warm and safe, but also a little heavy, because part of him wondered if his confidence from yesterday would last, or if today would bring challenges that might shake him again. But he took a slow breath and reminded himself that every journey has moments that test you, moments that confuse you, moments that make your heart beat faster not from excitement but from uncertainty, yet those moments are the ones that help you grow the most. With this thought, he stood up, stretched, got dressed, and prepared for a new day of speaking, listening, discovering, and learning. As he stepped into the hotel lobby, he saw the receptionist from yesterday, who greeted him with a warm smile and said, "Good morning." Off to explore again? And Aaron smiled back and answered, "Yes. I want to see the old market today," and the receptionist nodded and said, "It's a wonderful place. Lots of local things. Just be ready for the crowds." The warning made Aaron feel a little nervous, because crowds usually meant noise, fast conversations, confusion, and many chances to misunderstand people, but he pushed the worry aside and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The city felt different today, busier, louder, filled with people walking quickly, buses moving through traffic, and street vendors setting up their stands with fruits, bread, and colorful handmade items. He decided to take the bus to the market, not because it was faster, but because he wanted to challenge himself to experience English in a real situation where he had to listen, respond, and stay calm even if things felt confusing. When he reached the bus stop, a few people were already waiting, an older couple whispering softly to each other, a young man with headphones, a woman carrying grocery bags. Aaron stood quietly, holding his map, and looked up at the digital sign above the stop. It showed numbers and destinations, but he wasn't sure which bus he needed. He took a slow breath, repeating to himself, "It's okay to ask. It's okay to try." And then he turned to the woman holding the grocery bags and said, "Excuse me, does this bus go to the old market?" The woman looked at him kindly and answered, "Yes, bus 14. It should come soon." And he smiled and said, "Thank you," feeling a small wave of relief. Asking simple questions still made him nervous, but every time he asked one, his confidence grew a little more. When the bus arrived, people stepped inside quickly, and the driver greeted each passenger with a brief nod. Aaron stepped inside carefully, tapped his travel card on the small machine, and took a seat near the window. The bus moved through the city, and Aaron watched the streets pass by new buildings, old houses, colorful murals, and people hurrying to work. He listened to the automated voice announcing each stop, speaking English slowly and clearly, and he practiced repeating the names quietly under his breath. After a few stops, the bus became crowded, and Aaron felt the familiar feeling of uncertainty rising inside him, that uncomfortable feeling when you're surrounded by people and you're not sure where to get off. But he looked at his map again and again, reminding himself that he could ask for help if he needed to. When the bus finally stopped near the old market, he stepped off and looked around. The area was alive with energy, people selling clothes, food, souvenirs, music pouring out of small shops, children running and laughing, and tourists walking around with large cameras. The smell of fresh bread, spices, grilled meat, and sweet pastries filled the air. The sounds were louder than he expected, vendors calling out, customers bargaining, languages mixing together, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed, like the environment was too large, too fast, too noisy for him. But then he reminded himself that this was exactly why he came, to learn, to challenge himself, to push through these moments and grow. He walked slowly into the market, taking in every detail, trying to breathe calmly, but suddenly he noticed something that made his heart jump. He couldn't find the small notebook where he kept his English phrases. He checked his pockets again and again, looked inside his bag, and felt panic rising. That notebook had been his safety net, his comfort, the thing that made him feel prepared. Without it, he felt exposed, unprotected. For a moment, the market around him felt too big, too loud, too confusing. But then he closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "You can do this. You don't need the notebook. You know enough. You can speak. You can listen. You can try," and those words helped the panic soften. He walked toward a stand selling fresh fruit, hoping to practice his English and calm himself. The vendor smiled and said, "Hello. Would you like some fruit?" And Aaron hesitated, but then he pointed to a small basket of strawberries and said, "Yes. How much is this?" The vendor answered, $5, and Aaron smiled and said, "Okay, I'll take it," paying and thanking the vendor. This small success helped him relax a little, but he still felt uneasy without his notebook. As he walked deeper into the market, he stopped in front of a stand selling handmade wooden carvings. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, stood behind the counter. When she saw Aaron looking, she smiled shyly and said, "Hello," and Aaron smiled back, noticing that her English was simple, slow, like his. He said gently, "Hello. These are beautiful," pointing at the carvings. The girl nodded and said, "My father makes them. With wood, from the mountains." Her English was soft but clear, and Aaron felt comfort in the simplicity of the conversation. He picked up a small carving shaped like a bird and asked, "How much is this one?" The girl counted with her fingers and answered, $8. Aaron said, okay, and bought it. As she wrapped the carving, the girl looked up and said something that surprised him. Your English, good. The words were small, simple, but they hit his heart like a warm wave. He had lost his notebook, felt overwhelmed, almost panicked, but here he was communicating, connecting, growing, without needing anything but courage. He thanked the girl and walked away with a lighter heart. But the real test of the day was still waiting for him. After leaving the market, Aaron wanted to visit a small historical museum nearby. He followed the signs, but after a few minutes of walking, he reached an intersection where the signs pointed in different directions, and he realized he didn't know which way to go. He checked his map, but the streets looked different in real life. He looked around for someone to ask, but people seemed busy, walking quickly, talking on phones, and he didn't want to disturb them. His confidence from earlier started to fade, and his mind felt cloudy again. Finally, he saw an older man sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper. Aaron approached him carefully and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the History Museum?" The man looked up, smiled gently, and answered, the museum. Yes, but it's a little tricky to explain. Let me show you, and he stood up, pointing down the street and giving detailed directions. The man spoke with a strong local accent, and Aaron struggled to understand every word. Some words were clear, some were blurry, and some he couldn't understand at all. He felt his heart beating fast again, the fear of misunderstanding rising like a wave. But he tried to stay calm, nodding slowly, repeating what he understood. Go straight, then right, near the big church? The man smiled and said, yes, exactly, and Aaron thanked him, grateful for the kindness of strangers. He walked in the direction the man pointed, but after a few minutes, he wasn't sure if he was on the right path. The street looked different from what he imagined, and the buildings all looked similar. He felt lost again, unsure, worried, and he considered turning back, but then he saw a small tourist information center on the corner with a sign that said, "Ask here." He hesitated, afraid of making a mistake, afraid of sounding confused, but then he reminded himself that help existed for a reason, and that asking was part of learning. He stepped inside the small building, where a woman behind the counter smiled warmly and said, "Hello. How can I help you?" For a second, Aaron felt the old fear return, but he pushed it aside and said, "I'm looking for the History Museum." "I think I walked the wrong way," and the woman nodded kindly, pulled out a map, and showed him the exact route with slow, clear English. She said, "Don't worry. Many people get confused here. The streets are not easy. You're not the first," and Aaron felt a wave of relief, not only because he now knew where to go, but because he realized something important. Everyone gets lost when they travel, not because they are bad at English, but because traveling is a learning experience, and mistakes are normal. With new confidence, he followed the map and finally reached the museum. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, and the rooms were filled with old photographs, artifacts, paintings, and stories from the past. He walked slowly through each room, listening to the audio guide in English. Some parts were easy to understand, others were more difficult, but he learned something important. Even when he didn't understand every word, he could understand the meaning. He could follow the story. He could connect the ideas. And this realization made him feel proud of how far he had come in just a few days. After the museum, he stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight and walked toward a small cafe to rest. When he sat down, the waiter came to his table and asked, "What would you like to drink?" Aaron answered confidently, "A tea, please," and when the waiter asked, "Black tea or green tea?" he smiled and said, "Green tea," without hesitation. While waiting, he thought about the entire day, the bus ride, the crowded market, the lost notebook, the confusing directions, the accent he struggled to understand, the moment he felt panic, and the kindness of strangers who helped him anyway. He realized that today had been full of small challenges, small tests, but each test had given him something new, a stronger voice, a calmer mind, a deeper confidence. When his tea arrived, he held the warm cup in his hands and looked out the window at the busy street. He whispered to himself softly, "I can handle difficult moments. I can speak even when I'm nervous. I can understand even when it's not perfect. I can ask for help. I can grow." And as he sipped his tea, he felt a calm sense of pride, a quiet understanding that confidence does not come from easy moments. It comes from difficult ones, from moments that push you, challenge you, test you, and show you that you are stronger than you think. As the sun began to set, he walked back to his hotel, feeling tired but peaceful. He knew that he had learned more today than any book or lesson could teach him. He knew that the world was teaching him English in the realest way possible. And when he reached his room and lay down on the bed, he felt grateful for the challenges, for the kindness of strangers, for the small victories, and for the slow but powerful transformation happening inside him. And with these thoughts warming his heart, he closed his eyes, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The next morning arrived with golden sunlight gently filling the hotel room, and when Aaron opened his eyes, something felt different inside him, something warm and steady, like a quiet strength he had not noticed before, and he lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds outside, the distant hum of traffic, the soft laughter of two people walking past the hotel, the faint ringing of church bells in the distance, and he realized that this city, once unfamiliar and frightening, was beginning to feel a little like home, or at least like a place where he belonged, even if only for a short while. He sat up, stretched his arms slowly, and smiled to himself, because when he thought about the last few days, the memories didn't feel scary anymore. They felt inspiring, powerful, like stories he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He remembered the first steps in the airport, the nervous conversations, the moments of confusion, the mistakes, the helpful strangers, the little victories, and he understood that each moment, good or bad, had shaped him, had taught him, had guided him to where he was right now, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed feeling more confident than he ever expected. He got ready for the day with a sense of calm he did not have before. Instead of rehearsing English phrases in front of the mirror, he simply breathed deeply and told himself, "You can handle whatever comes today," and for the first time, he truly believed it. When he walked down to the lobby, the receptionist waved at him happily and said, "Good morning. Big plans today?" And Aaron smiled naturally and answered, "Yes, I think so. I want to take a day trip outside the city," and the receptionist nodded with interest and said, "There's a beautiful village not far from here. You can take a train. Very easy. Many tourists go there," and when she handed him a small brochure with pictures of mountains, rivers, and narrow stone streets, Aaron felt excitement rise inside him. A day trip outside the city meant more English, more speaking, more listening, but also more beauty, more stories, more growth. Outside, the morning air felt crisp and fresh, and Aaron walked toward the train station with a light step, noticing how his mind was no longer filled with fear, but curiosity. The streets he once found confusing now looked familiar, and the signs he once struggled to understand now felt almost natural. When he reached the train station, he looked at the large screen that listed train times, and even though the names of the destinations looked long and difficult, he felt calm. He walked to the ticket counter, and when the woman behind the glass looked up and said, "Next, please," he stepped forward confidently and said, "Hello. I'd like a round-trip ticket to Riverton Village, please," and the woman typed quickly on her computer, asking, "Would you like the 9:30 train or the 10:05 train?" And without hesitation he answered, "The 9:30, please." The woman printed the ticket, handed it to him, and said, "Platform 4. Train leaves in 15 minutes," and Aaron smiled and thanked her, feeling a warm pride in how smoothly the conversation had gone. He walked toward Platform 4, weaving through travelers carrying backpacks, families pulling suitcases, and local commuters reading their morning newspapers. He listened to the announcements echo across the station, and this time he understood almost all of them, words like departing, arriving, platform, delay, and on time, and he felt a soft excitement at how far he had come. When the train arrived, he stepped inside and found a seat near the window. The train smelled faintly of old seats and fresh air from the open doors, and as it began to move, Aaron watched the city slowly fade away, replaced by wide fields, small houses, and forests stretching into the distance. During the train ride, an older man sat across from him, holding a camera and a guidebook. After a few minutes, the man looked up and smiled warmly, saying, "Beautiful day to travel, isn't it?" And Aaron smiled and answered, "Yes, it is. I'm visiting the village for the first time," and the man's eyes lit up as he said, "You will love it. It's peaceful, quiet, full of history," and the two of them continued talking for a while. The man spoke with a gentle accent, different from any accent Aaron had heard before, and at first it was difficult to understand every word, but instead of panicking, Aaron listened carefully, asked small questions when he needed clarification, and allowed himself to relax into the conversation. He realized something important during this moment. Understanding every word is not necessary. Understanding meaning is enough. While waiting for his flight, he sat near a window, watching planes take off and land, and he reflected on everything he had learned. He realized that speaking English abroad wasn't about being perfect, it was about being brave. It was about trying, listening, asking, making mistakes, learning from them, and trying again. It was about being human. He whispered softly to himself, "I am a confident traveler now," and those words filled him with a warm, peaceful strength. When boarding began, he stepped onto the plane calmly, found his seat, and settled in. As the plane rose into the night sky, leaving the city behind, Aaron closed his eyes and allowed himself to smile, not a big smile, but a gentle, proud smile, the kind you make when you know you've changed, when you know you've grown, when you know that the story you are living is becoming the story you will tell. And in that moment of quiet reflection, he knew with certainty that he would never be the same again. Because traveling had not only shown him the world, it had shown him himself. He whispered one last time, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to the journey itself, to the English words that had carried him, to the strangers who had helped him, to the challenges that had shaped him, to the courage that had grown inside him, and to the future waiting for him with open arms. And as the plane carried him home, he felt ready, not just to speak English abroad, but to live his life with confidence, clarity, and an open heart.